Let's start the interview. So this interview is completely on Kubernetes. Okay, so you said you have worked on a couple of Kubernetes activities and all, right? So what used to be your daily activities like in Kubernetes?
So daily activities in sense, most of the times we have a standard template where we use for a deployment procedure. So on a daily basis, what we used to do is we used to enhance the template what we have. Like I can just give an example where let's take an example of a deployment YAML file. And it's a standard template what we use. Only the image details are gonna change, and the service ports are gonna change. So a couple of enhancements what we have done was like adding liveness scope and readiness scope, wherein changing customizing those liveness and readiness scopes, and a couple of things like adding config maps, as well as secrets and
So basically you're a consumer, not kind of like admin. You're a consumer, what I can see.
Like the cluster what we are now using is like was being set up by us. And when you say daily activities, since there will be a standard template usually when we like in the CI/CD platform which is already automated.
Okay.
So most of the templates were readily available, and
Okay.
we were written those, and we were consuming those. So most of the time we won't be writing any of the templates from scratch. We will be taking them, and then we used to enhance those as per the requirements.
Okay.
So
fine.
that's what we usually do.
Okay. So while working on your project, did you face any issues image creation or while deploying application onto Kubernetes? So you might have faced many issues. So can you give me a few which issues you have faced?
Yeah. So couple of issues what we faced were related to time dimensions. So like take a typical example where you write you are trying to build a job, it is like a new job, so which actually has to do a git clone. But in sometimes what used to happen was whenever it tried to hit the URL, it used to be like host unknown. It cannot be the clone is not going to happen. So we figured out that there was an issue with the code DNS.
Okay.
So ideally, whenever a request from our job has to go to any of the DNS nodes, that has to pass the code DNS.
Okay.
So whatever the request that goes to code DNS, it follows like a rabbit and queue, messaging queue policy, like first in first served policy. So when there is like a huge number of requests at code DNS, it was not able to handle those requests, and then it used to fail. That's the reason the git clone has to is going to fail. So what we have done was we have customized the code in such a way. So we reduce the TTL. There is a particular component called TTL, a particular element where we can increase or decrease that based on that. So it used to take the request and then it used to forward it. So by default, what code DNS is 30 seconds for the TTL. In 30 seconds, it will wait for 30 seconds, and whatever the request it will get in the last 30 seconds, it will execute all those 30 in a single chance.
Okay.
Like for 1 second, 30 requests. It's a maximum. 30 seconds. Whatever the request it used to get in 30 seconds, it will execute them. So if there are a lot number of requests in 30 seconds, let's say, it will take for 30 seconds you should get 50 requests, it should be okay. But whereas you get 500 requests, it's too much of load on your code DNS.
Okay.
So that's where we have reduced the code DNS from 32, we have reduced it to 5. So that for every 5 seconds, it used to capture the requests and try to execute them so that we have our exact DNS resolution is going to happen.
Okay. So any other issues like while using config maps or like any other issues that you have faced?
Config map, no. not typically
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
used in
So,
industrial
so
components.
you know what is
Yeah.
pod? Pod,
Sorry?
pod.
POD. Yeah. Pod, yes.
Yeah. So in that, can we have a multiple containers?
Yes.
So is it possible to have a similar container? Like let's say my application is basically NJNX. I'm just running a
Mm-hmm.
small application which is NJNX.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can I
Okay.
have the two instances of the same container type? So is it possible in like Kubernetes?
Uh, I don't think it's possible having the same image multiple times in a pod. I don't think it's possible.
Okay, then like if it is a different container, is it possible to be there in the same pod?
Yes. Yeah.
So can you tell me like what are all the other pods that you have used in your project, like other patterns, like rather than like the actual pods? So you said like you can, sorry, rather than the actual containers, you said many other containers can be there, right? So have you worked on any
Mm-hmm.
patterns like sidecar, ambassador container, like that?
Mm, yeah, like couple of topics like init containers or like sidecar containers.
Mm-hmm.
So we have used those containers. So init containers in the sense, let's say when I want to spin up a particular pod, internally it used to have a Docker image. But
Okay.
when it tries to spin up a container, for example, if I need a particular file, some property file which has to be dynamic, like whenever the price is zero, the dynamic file has to get populated for the pod. In that case, I can have an init container to have a cross check whether the file is applicable or available or not. And if it's not available, we say like the container is not up because like it's failed in the initialization part, so that I can try to fix this like rather than spending too much of time what exactly has happened. I'll have a clear cut idea that the property file is missing, and then we can work on how to get the property file.
Okay.
And the other one is like sidecar containers, whereas so let's say you have an application and you want to have a logging mechanism available for the content for that particular pods. And since it's a production, like when you take a production application, you need to have like the entire 24 by 7 logs.
Okay.
So which typically will increase the load on your pod.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to reduce that so that I can go with another container, which is like a sidecar container. So whatever the logs that gets populated into my container will be ideally diverted to, like I'll have a volume mounting concept similar to Docker,
Okay.
and I'll move it to sidecar so that that's like my application board will not have any other logs, so that the 100% utilization will be only for the performance perspective. So
Okay.
yeah.
So as you said, like performance, so like let's say your container is there. So now you have some two replicas. Okay. So in the beginning, so it was very less traffic. So that's why you've created two replicas. So let's
Mm-hmm.
say your application grows, like depending on like this, the time or situation. So it can get like more traffic towards it. Like, so is there any like kind of like auto scaling methodology in Kubernetes?
Yeah, there is a auto scaling or like horizontal pod auto scaling concept,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, like as per the article that I've read in Kubernetes, it's
Mm-hmm.
not like a production grade.
Mm-hmm.
So we have tested it, and then it's kind of a typical mechanism, but
Mm-hmm.
it needs some other factors like it has a dependency with the metrics, and like we need to have a particular metric server which is actually supported by Kubernetes, and then that's the only mechanism what Kubernetes say like this has to be available in your
Mm-hmm.
cluster to make sure the horizontal the pod autoscaler to
Okay.
work.
Okay.
So we have tried it, but it's not up because like we have been
So on what
using.
basis like it will gonna create more containers and and particular basis it should increase and decrease the pods, right? So on what basis it will
Yes.
do that?
So ideally, we can set some parameters saying like the CPU load is like greater than 80% or like
Mm-hmm.
memory less than like 1 GB or like 1.5 gigs.
Mm-hmm.
So couple of parameters we can set, and then when you try to trigger it,
Okay.
and when it reaches the threshold limit,
Mm-hmm.
the horizontal like the HPA will come into the picture and then try to spin up the pods as per the like the minimum and maximum of their events.
Okay. Okay, fine. So let's say I'm very new to Kubernetes. Okay, I don't know what Kubernetes does and like, so I have a very minimal information. So if given a chance to you, so you want to choose between like whether you want to use KubeADM or like if you want to use any cloud provider services like EKS or any other services, like what do you suggest? Like is better to use KubeADM or like other services?
I would say uh, any managed service.
Hmm. Do you mean any
Like,
cloud providers, right?
right, like typically that's solely and entirely dependent on the requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you say the KubeADM,
Mm-hmm.
so the basic one what you can do is like you can spin up a couple of machines and you can have your own master setup and then you can have your own nodes.
Okay.
But see, when you go into production, you might need a multi-master and then a multi-node concept,
Mm-hmm.
which is typically a bit of difficult or like you can say a bit of it might take some time to troubleshoot the actual issues, and
Okay.
maintaining the nodes will also be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when you come to any of the managed services, so you don't need to worry about the masters because it's like a kind of a service where it will make sure whether it's a multi-master or a single master or like a number of masters, the service provider is going to take care of the master, and you will be the one who has to handle the nodes.
Okay.
So that the cluster is not going to pay.
So if you want to think in perspective of cost, so which one will you suggest, like cloud service or like KubeADM?
Cost perspective, I would like again like it's again dependent on the type of instances and the type of load you are trying to manage. Because when you say you're going to the like, I would say one more advantage in KubeADM was so when you try to install with the KubeADM way,
Mm-hmm.
like you might have a better understanding of actually what is happening there.
Mm-hmm.
So you try to run a couple of KubeADM init commands.
Mm-hmm.
You will try to spin up the kube scheduler or like the kube controller or like the replication.
So which one you have used in your project, like KubeADM or like any other?
It's a managed service.
Okay. Okay. That's fine.
So in this case, it will be actually with taking care of the nodes.
Mm-hmm.
So when you come to the costing case, so here like there is the cloud one or the other one, the KubeADM way.
Mm-hmm.
Only difference is like the manager. So when you take a single master with a cloud provider, it's like almost same. But when you go with a multiple master in KubeADM way, that will bear the cost of the other VM or like it goes on increasing. Let's say I want to go with the 3 masters, if it takes 3 VMs. But when you go with the cloud provider, it's irrespective of the number of masters because it's not going to be taken care of by us, and it's only the service we are trying to convey.
Okay. Finally, like you're telling to use like cloud managed services or like KubeADM. So because like it is very easy to manage, and so that's what you meant, right?
Yeah, like that's what it depends on entirely the requirement on the customer perspective because
so security perspective, which one is better, KubeADM or like managed services?
Sorry?
Security perspective, like so I want to make sure I'm working on some machine learning and some kind of a data which is very sensitive. So will you suggest the Cube like a managed service by AWS or Azure, or like will you that time suggest like KubeADM? So which one is better that time?
So when you come to the security part, so it is you who have to configure the network policies or the certificates or the config maps or the secrets. It's entirely managed by you in this case. Whether it's a managed or a curated way, only the cluster is going to be given by the provider. So whatever the policy set or the secrets or the security certificate, whatever you are going to use, it's actually managed by you, but only the provider is going to vary. So I would say for a guy who has If you want to do a research perspective, I would say kubectl or like go with the bare VM and try to install it. But when you want to focus on the developer part, I would say take a managed service and then try starting the development part. Because there are two ways of Kubernetes. One is a admin way where you want to understand what actually is happening inside the Kubernetes.
Mm-hmm.
In this, when you go to a cloud managed service, you would be directly given with a cluster where you are not going to touch anything. You would start directly consuming it. But whereas in the kubectl way, you see actually the content, how the master is going to come up, and you're the one who will be responsible for trying to add a node to the cluster so that you'll have a better understanding in this case. So I would say the research part or the admin part, go with a kubectl or a bare VM, try to do things that, and then whereas you have to do a development perspective and then try to spin up the pods, and try to spin up your application and say a managed service.
Okay. Okay. So let's say I have an application, so which involves database and an application server. Okay. Two things are like involved in this project. So in this particular setup, so what are all the objects that you are going to create it for a database, and what are all the objects that you are going to create it for your application server? So, and if you're creating a different one for like database, so why you are creating a different object?
Sorry, so you want a web server application with database?
So let's say I have a page wherein like it fetches the data from database and it will display. Okay, so kind of a table, like let's say it's kind of a employee table, so which is there in your database, and you want to display that onto a web page. Okay, so now obviously you need to have a two parts. So you can't like keep everything in a single part. You can do that, right? So database should be separate, and you should be fetching that data like to your web server application pods, right? So what are all the things that you're going to create it for your database to make sure if that pod goes down, you need to recover it back like with the same data. And like for application server, so what are all the objects that you're going to create?
So the entire application to be up and running, I would say, so for the, like we need to create a deployment objective, deployment object, and service object. Service object means like maybe couple of services like cluster IP and a load balancer kind of a service.
Okay.
And you might need a...
So for database, which service you're going to create? So whether it's a load balancer or which service, which kind of service you'll create?
I'm going to create a cluster IP kind of a service because I don't want the database to be exposed outside to the internet.
Okay.
Because there might be some information. That's why it's called a database. And only the application needs to have the permissions to connect to the database.
Okay.
In that case, for this particular database, I'm going to create a cluster IP type of a service. And I would need config maps because I need to have the property file available for the application to.
Okay. So you're going to create deployments for both application server and database? Like only deployments you'll create, or any other objects that you're going to create?
What's a deployment should be fine.
So in that case, assume like, okay, you have created some deployment. Okay. So what happens is like, if some issues, like let's say in database, so you have created a pod, so which fails with many issues. It can be like, whatever the parameters you have defined, it has crossed to that, or like it can be application crash itself. So inside your pod, which is sitting. So that time, how will you recover your data? Because let's say it has 10 rows of entries already. Like if a deployment goes and comes up, it will be a fresh instance, right? It doesn't have like the actually already stored thing. So how will you recover that back?
Wait, again. So, sorry, I actually missed that one. So maybe for the database, I think actually we should go with a stateful set because we need to the data part, right? Sorry.
Okay.
I was confused about that part. Okay. For the database, I would say I would go with stateful set with a volume claim of like the 15 GB or like 20 GB because it is just a stat.
Okay.
So, and couple of secrets for storing the credentials for the database.
Okay.
And
so what exactly, like, I mean, like you said, stateful sets, right? So is there any major difference between your deployments and stateful sets? So why can't we use stateful sets for our application server as well? Because it backs up properly, right? So why like deployment for application server and stateful sets for the database?
actually, we can take the statement for the web application as well. But since it's a sample application, what we are trying to do is like just fetch the data from the database and then try to display it from the front end.
Okay.
In these, actually, we are not talking about the login or like storage perspective. So I would say we don't need a stateful set for the front end because it's like I would say like you just try to hit a google.com and then try to do an entry. It should store in the database, or like I would say like what's Google, I need to put some information in the database and then it should just display it on the web page. I would say that is not as much as useful in the scenario what we are talking about. And I would say for the database, we would go to stateful set because we need the data to be available even in case the pod get destroyed. So for that, like whatever the volume we have to click the data, we can use that particular volume to spin up another stateful set which will have directly all the data inbuilt, and then the database is not up and running. So in that case, I would say I'll go with the stateful set.
Okay, fine. So do you know like there is a concept called as like object called a service account. So why we need that like service account?
Okay. So service account.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say I have a couple of I have a big team, whereas let's say 10 members. Out of them, like couple of guys are like developers and couple of guys are like testers and then couple of guys are like admins. I don't want to have the entire people having the same kind of permissions. So I would create like ideally what we can do is like we can have the individual user define a particular set of permissions. But what if the people are going to increase? So I would say create a service account so that for that particular service account, I'm going to map a particular role so that, let's say, in this case, like admin developers and testers, I would say for the admins, I would create a single service account. And for developers, I would say create a single service account. And for the testers, I would say single service account. And with this service account, they can access those particular respective permissions. So how the service account is going to work in this? I would create a cluster role with a particular permissions with the role in the role binding, and these both will be given to a particular service account. So whenever this particular service account is being accessed by a particular guy, whatever the role, like whatever the permission the service account is going to have, the user is going to have the same typical kind of a permissions. So for the developer, I'm not going to give the entire way. It's like a pretty bit different. I would say like restriction to delete, not being able to delete a couple of secrets or like the config minutes. And for the testers, I would say like just create the bots and then like delete the bots, restrict it to a particular namespace where they can do their own testing. So it's so like pretty simply you can say like to restrict the permissions in case of accessibility to the tester is what we can have a service account for.
Okay. So you said like I mean like you have used a couple of objects like deployment, stateful sets and all, right? So while especially dealing with deployments, so you would have definitely dealt with some deployment strategies, right? So like rolling update, so by default that there are a couple of other patterns also like blue-green canary deployment. Are you aware of that, like canary deployment or something?
Yeah, but we haven't used it anywhere. I do have a like sample behavior, like I can say this like an example which I've done when I was in my previous team.
Okay, but you know the concept, right? How it works, canary.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so canary is basically you will maintain two versions of your application. and if version 2, you'll leave it for some part of like users and like so other part of the users will be using the previous version itself. Correct?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Give the access to restricted number of people and then take the feedback. If it is working fine, increase the traffic to from 2 to 4 and then 4 to 6 and then 6 to 8 and then finally 100%. So that it will be, it's like a gradual incremental deployment, I would say. So going from a particular relevant, like say first application is visible to the internal teams where they can see if everyone's side is working fine. And then I would spread it across the teams and then try to access it and then see if everything is working fine, or like I would collect the feedback, and then if everything is working fine, then I would say I would leave it to the entire audience, to the outside world.
Okay. So as you mentioned, like you'll leave part by part, right? So my requirement is like, let's say when you start deploying the new version of your code, okay, that time, so that version 2 shouldn't be like accessed by my users because it is not yet confirmed which I'll be using for 100%. So I want to make sure that version will be accessible from only the test engineers of my team, and like other version, like the previous version should be still like serving my users. So like users or developers, whoever there in my team or like whoever is accessing that application should be redirected to version 1. Only the test engineers like who are working in my team. So because they want to do the testing of that version 2. So I need to redirect them to version 2. So is it possible in Kubernetes?
Definitely. Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So would you do that or will you approach that?
So let's take a simple way for this. So when you try to spin up a pod, so ideally when you want to have a particular pod on a particular node, you would go with a node label. Sorry, label selector or like node selector. So what I would say is like let's try to add a particular node to this cluster. For that particular node, I would have the permission like the security group restricted to only the couple of IPs which are of the testing engineers team, so that they can only access it. So that whatever the traffic coming from these segments should be diverted to this way.
No. See, my requirement is like, let's say, canary deployment. You're not when you create a pod, your just says like where you'll mention 6 replicas. So when you have your like node selector or node affinity, so applied on particular deployment, so it will deploy all that 6 replicas into the same machine, right?
Yes.
So that time, how will you like identify one node for only tester, other nodes for like developers? So how will you manage that?
So I would have those source IPs, right? So let's say I will have a particular team. So where they are accessing the cluster, I would have the source IP of their machine. So I would say I would restrict those IPs, like add those IPs as part of the security group of the node. Where the version 2 of the code is
like let's say I'm not using AWS.
Okay.
So and also you mentioned, like I'll be blocking those IPs. So let's say my IP addresses every day it is gonna change. Let's say that I'll give my users like test engineers or whoever it is in my team, I'll give some public instance for that. Like I don't have any a static IP for which is associated with those missions because I don't need to do that. Anyway, they'll log in through SSH. I don't want to do that as well. So that time every day you should come and you should block it in your security groups. So do you think this is the best method to do it?
Yeah. So I think like for this kind of a scenario, like maybe we can go back to the one what we have discussed, the service accounts. So I would just create a particular namespace, or like I would say like for this particular testing team, we do have a namespace, or like you can see like they'll be able to visible a couple of pods, so that whenever the pod is going to come up, only the testers team or the other one or the admin guy is going to be able to see and then try to access it. If it
Okay.
is not at all visible to the developers, they are not able to access it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you said like you have multiple applications you'll be deployed on Kubernetes cluster, right? So have you used any CI/CD for this? Because the application, as soon as the application changes, like you need to deploy something onto a Kubernetes cluster and all, right? So what are all the tools you have used for that CI/CD part, like in your process?
Can you repeat the question?
No, I mean, you want to see, obviously, when you want to deal with your Kubernetes project, so you should deploy your objects onto your machines, right, in a cluster.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you people used to do it manually, or like some automated process used to be there?
No, it's an automated way. Yeah, it's an automated one.
Yeah, how you I mean, what are all the tools that you've used to automate those things and all?
So mainly we are actually using Jenkins.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been we used to write Jenkins files.
Okay.
So what is the typical CI/CD process where I will do a clone of this particular repo and then try to build it using Maven or like typically Gradle, what we are currently using.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's doing the Gradle build, once the build is successful, it's going to have some sonarchive analysis of that. And then once sonarchive analysis, then it will have a security scan out of that. And once it is done, it's going to store it is going to create a Docker image out of that. And then the Docker image is going to get stored in a particular artifactory. And those particular artifactory, like the Docker image details which has been published in the artifactory will be replaced in the YAML file. Like those that will be passed as a parameter for the YAML file. And once that's changed in the YAML file of the Kubernetes deployment YAML file, it's going to create those pods or like Kubernetes deployments or like the statements.
Okay, so once you deploy onto your Kubernetes cluster, so my question is like, see, when you do kubectl apply -f, like you can do that on folder also. So it is going to create multiple objects, right? So how would you make sure that which is successfully deployed? Because as soon as like if you execute kubectl that particular command, it's not that like it is going to be perfectly all right, right? It can fail after 2 to 3 minutes, right? So how will you make sure that which is successfully deployed? So is that also automated, or like it will be like you manually go and check it whether it's
with that particular like with the applications like up and running scenario, we as I said in the first, we have been using the liveness and the readiness props as part of the YAML file. So when the application is when the pod is trying to spin up, so technically if the liveness or readiness is not going to say like it's not filling, the pod is going to say like it's not up and running. So that's where you can identify, or like, that's where you identify the application is running or not running. So what we ideally do is, so we try to.
No. I mean, see, like I know, like readiness and liveness pro comes into picture like once if application starts, right? So if you want to make sure your application is like 100%, like if you want to make sure your application is highly available, you'll go for readiness and liveness pro. My question is, you will deploy by using Jenkins, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you like, let's say you're executing some kubectl apply -f, and then you're doing a deployment. Okay, so that command anyway it will gonna work. So if no syntax errors, so definitely it will gonna work. Let's say in that deployment file you have used a wrong image, so then definitely it will gonna be stuck. So not even your readiness or a liveness pro will be report back to you, right? So whether it is successful or a failure. It tries to restart, it tries to do some things. But I want to make sure if it is failing, so I want to get some kind of like information about that. Whether it is successful deployment or like whether it's not deployed properly, something like that.
Okay. So maybe we can have a check running once this the kubectl command is upon like when the kubectl command is used.
Okay.
Let's say I would run a curl command to make sure the exact change is available. Let's say I have changed a particular element of an HTML file. So I want that in that if there is a change, I should be coming with some stat. So whereas I should do a build and then try to create a Docker image, publish it to somewhere in Matic Factory or like Nexus or somewhere like that, and then try to use that image. So ideally, if those changes are getting reflected, which I will run a curl command to see if those changes are actually available in the image what I'm trying to use, and display that as part of the observable of the Jenkins job, and see if that particular curl command is returning me exact output. Then say I would say finish the job, or say like throw another saying like that changes are not available, and then try to delete those changes what I've done. If you delete blah blah blah, you can do that, and then see there is something mistake or like that image parameters not being passed, something with some issues. You can try to do that. So see if actually everything is working fine, or like is there any mismatch in doing that.
So do you know what is Kubernetes operators?
I think I'm clear about that. Kubernetes operator.
No issues.
Yeah, but
no issues. Headless services, have you used headless services? I mean, did you got chance to use headless services?
Yes, yeah, headless services.
So why we need it? Like, where you have used it?
So I have used it some time back, but I'll try to remember that couple of minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So ideally, when we try to do a deployment, for any particular deployment to be accessed by the object is to actually typically need a service. So let's say I don't have a deployment. I want to create a service, and once the service is created, I want a particular service to be mapped for a deployment. Like such is the kind of a reverse engineering technology where first you write a deployment and then use those metadata or the annotations in the service and then try to map a deployment to the service.
Okay.
If I want to do the vice versa, whereas in first I create the service and then I want to use the parameters of the service to be mapped to a deployment, I would say I would create a headless service in this case.
Okay. So headless service is available for both stateful sets and deployment, or like it's only for deployments?
I think it's applicable for stateful sets.
Okay.
So the application what I have worked on was a stateful set. It works for stateful set service.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, that's it from my side. So yeah, nice talking to you, man. Have a good day. Okay, I'll let you know the feedback. Thank you.